Do you really need a dedicated winter bike? It's the question of this video, the topic I'm going to discuss over the next few minutes. Now, in this video, I'll give you reasons you might want a dedicated winter training bike, what to look for in a winter training bike, and what makes a good winter training bike. Let's roll the intro and discuss. So reasons for having a dedicated winter training bike, in my opinion, are, well, two things really. It's about saving the wear and tear on your pride and joy, your carbon race bike, and it's also about mud guards. Now the first one is a really important one. If you have an expensive bike, you don't really want to ride it through the winter when you're going to get covered in salt and mud, and it's just going to cost you a lot of money in maintaining it. So it's about having a bike that you're not as precious about, won't cost you as much to change the parts, you've got lower cost parts on it, and you can save money in the long run. The second reason, is probably the biggest reason, is mud guards. Mud guards are ace. Mud guards stop all that water and mud, cow poo, whatever else the farmer dragged out onto the roads that day from covering you and making it look like you've been on a mountain bike ride when you've actually just been on a road ride. It keeps your feet dry, keeps your bum dry, it just makes riding in the rain on wet roads a more pleasant experience and helps you when you're doing those 4 or 5 hour base rides. You're not going to get really cold and damp and miserable, so mud guards are ace. Of course, there's nothing to stop you using your main bike, your only bike perhaps, through the winter, and many people do. It's just fine. You might want to make a few changes like some clip-on mud guards, and you will have to clean it more regularly to make sure those expensive components don't wear out. So what exactly do you need on a winter training bike? Well, I'm going to use my very own personal Enigma as an example of how you might like to build a bike for the purposes of riding through the winter. Now, I've had this bike for 10 years. I built it primarily as a winter training bike. Back when I lived in London and I was racing on the road for the summer, I wanted a nice, comfy, reliable bike for winter training, and so I bought this. Now, back then, and still now really to an extent, touring and all that style bikes are really good candidates because they have mudguard mounts. They also have a more relaxed geometry than a road bike, and a few other factors that are making really good choices for a winter training bike. So a number of things you want on a winter training bike, and the main one are the mudguards. Now these are proper full-length SKS mudguards that actually attach directly to the frame at the dropouts, the brake bridge, down the bottom bracket, and at the fork as well. And these are full-length mudguards, so called because they wrap quite a lot of the wheel and give you plenty of coverage at the front with a flap to protect your feet from getting wet, and also to help the person at the back from getting covered in spray. You can of course add an extra flap which goes right down to the bottom. Dave Atkinson got a good example where it's almost dragging on the ground, providing maximum coverage for the person behind you, but I ride on my own a lot of times, so I don't worry about the person behind me. But when you ride in a group of people, all with mud guards, it makes a big difference and you don't get covered in road spray, and it just means you have a more enjoyable, less miserable experience out on the winter rides. So mud guards are the big ones. A couple of other things. Metal makes a really good choice for a winter bike. This is a steel frame. You could also choose an aluminium. You could go for carbon if you're worried about weight, but weight isn't a primary focus here, and there aren't many carbon frames that let you fit proper full-length mud guards. So you have to look at using clip-on guards, which aren't quite as good and rattly, and they just tend to be more prone to problems. So a steel frame or aluminium frame has proper mounts for mud guards. The weight isn't really a factor for a winter bike. Winter isn't really a time for performance and aero and low weight. You're just doing the miles, and having a bit of extra weight is no bad thing. It makes you work harder for a start, and when you get to spring, you jump on your race bike, it's going to feel much lighter, much faster, and you have a psychological benefit straight away. So I've gone for a steel frame with a steel fork, and that fork, by the way, weighs as much, if not more, than the frame on its own. The other thing you might want to do is get rid of your aero carbon wheels. You don't need aero in the winter. For some cheap aluminium wheels, just going to be less expensive to replace when the bearings go, and if you're using rim brakes, you're not worried about the braking surface, and an aluminium braking surface on rim brakes is much better than carbon as well. Along with some sturdy wheels, you also want some sturdy tyres. So get a tyre with a puncture-proof belt in it just to minimise the risk of getting a puncture on a 5-hour training ride in the rain. You also might want to go tubeless, as I have here, because it just minimises the risk of getting a puncture at this time of year. You'll also want to fit the widest possible tyre your frame would take, 28, 30, 32 maybe. Unfortunately, this bike is showing its age and these are 25mm wide tyres. It's the widest it will take, held back by the rim brakes. So that shows how far modern road bikes have advanced with disc brakes and wide tyre clearances. There's no point putting the latest spangly group set on, a SRAM Red ETAP Axis or Dura-Race Di2. Just put a cheaper group set on. 105 would be fine, Tiagra maybe. Here I've got an old SRAM Force 10-speed mechanical group set. Then a couple of other things you definitely want to consider with this type of bike are you want a comfy saddle, because comfort is important. You may double wrap your bar tape on handlebars for a bit more comfort as well. And then you need to think about your accessories. I'm talking a saddlebag with all your spares you need, a couple of spare tubes, tubeless patches if you need them, tyre levers and a chain tool breaker. Some good lights, some good high quality lights and bright enough to be seen and to see where you're going as well. A bike computer if you use one, you might not. And then a good pump as well, and 2 bottle cages because you're doing long rides and you need plenty of hydration. So just to recap, there's mud guards, wide tyres, tough durable tyres, comfort focused components like your saddle and bar tape, then lots of accessories and spares to make sure when you have a mechanical or any incident out in the middle of a long distance training ride, out in the middle of the countryside, you'll be able to fix it and get back on your way as quickly as possible. But it's also about minimising the risk of having an incident, which is why you want proven components, not super lightweight, fancy stuff that might fail in the middle of the countryside, but reliable, proven components that, yes, might be a bit heavier, but aren't going to let you down. So that's my example of a winter training bike, and one that stood me in good stead for the last 10 years that I've owned this bike. The best investment I've ever made in my cycling career. It paid for itself many times over. And apart from the initial cost of the frame and fork and the components, I haven't spent much money on it. It's all about extracting as much from each component as possible, keeping it running on a shoestring. That is the key. So what makes a good winter training bike then? Well, it could be anything you want really. A touring all-access style bike like my Enigma is a good candidate. You've got more relaxed geometry than a race bike, and you've got the essential mudguard mounts as well. And the latest touring bikes do take disc brakes and wide tyres as well, so not quite as outdated as my bike behind me. Cyclocross bikes have long been a popular choice, really versatile, wide tyres. You can race them on a Sunday if you want, and then use them the rest of the week for training as well, so they're really popular choices. But of course, it's the modern fangled gravel and adventure bikes that are probably the most interesting alternative to a more traditional winter training bike. They're super versatile, you can get really wide tyres in them, you've got disc brakes, and a lot of them, if they're not too race focused, have mudguard mounts, and mounts for a lot more things like extra bottles and racks as well. So they're super versatile, and we're seeing a lot of people buy those sort of bikes because you can do so much with them. You can do gravel races, you can go bike packing, you can put some slick tyres on for winter training rides. You can really do a lot of riding with those bikes, which is why we're seeing them become a more popular and a slightly sexier option than a traditional touring bike, which does look a bit old-fashioned, if we're honest. And then perhaps the most interesting alternative to a dedicated winter training bike is the smart trainer. We've seen smart trainers become really advanced in the last few years with integrated power meters, and the likes of Swift and other online training platforms really utilise these smart trainers and providing a quite realistic indoor training experience. And some of them are quite expensive, £1,000 for a top of the range one, then more when you add in the computer and all the other accessories you need. So I've had a few conversations with people who are umming and ahhing between buying a winter training bike, whether a gravel bike or a touring bike like mine, or a smart trainer, and making that choice between the two. I think the choice of a smart trainer versus a dedicated winter training bike like my Enigma behind me is a really interesting one. It really shows how cycling has changed and matured and evolved in the last decade or so, that you could choose an indoor training experience over a real world winter suitable training bike like mine there. So yeah, interesting choices. But for me personally, I wouldn't be without my trusty Enigma winter training bike. I've had it for 10 years now, the best investment I've ever made in my cycling career. And the initial cost of the frame and the other components have been paid off many times over, and it hasn't really cost me much to keep it running. I've changed the tyres this winter, but apart from that, I'm still running some pretty old components, 10-speed mechanical rim brakes as well, so it's not modern at all, but it works, it's trusty, it's reliable, and that is why I think there's a place for a winter training bike in many people's garages around the UK. Anyway, that's enough rambling. I just want to share my thoughts on having a winter training bike, and whether it's an outdated idea or whether it's still a thing that you guys do. So let me know if you have one, if you're getting yours up and running this winter. Let me know in the comment section down below. If you think I'm barking up a mad tree, do let me know as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts, as always. But that's all for now. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't. I think my next video might be a comparison review between the Mason Boker and the Fairlight Seacan, which I posted on Instagram and got loads of interest, and also on YouTube here with pictures the other day. So that'll come out soon, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that coming up very soon. Anyway, it's a lovely sunny day. I'm going to continue my lunchtime ride, and I'll see you next time.